Meet the Enclave soldier, an American patriot who is still trying to fight for his country, long after it's been destroyed. This is a brand new Fallout 4 character build, which utilises some of the new content from the free update. I'm going to try and avoid any major spoilers, but I will also have to somewhat explain how to get the new gear this build uses, so if you don't want any spoilers at all, best to stop watching now. The special stats for this build are 3 strength, 5 perception, 5 endurance, 3 charisma, 9 intelligence, 1 agility, and 3 luck. Do keep in mind this includes the special book in Sanctuary, however it doesn't include any bobbleheads you might pick up on your travels. Most of the stats are at this level in order to get the required perks, but our high intelligence does mean we level quite quickly, and the decent perception and endurance gives solid VATS accuracy and a decent health pool. Agility being the dump stat does limit how long you can sprint for, and will typically only allow you a shot or 2 inside of VATS, but this shouldn't cause any major problems for the character. In terms of perks, I've split things into 3 separate categories: major, minor, and role-playing. The major perks are the ones you want to focus on above all others. As soon as they're available, you need to be investing points here. Minor perks are still important for the character, but don't need to be rushed quite so much. If you've got no major perks to be grabbing, then you can grab the minor perks to make your character a bit stronger. And role-playing perks are basically just there for role-playing purposes. Just something to add a little more flavour and personality to the character, but nothing you should focus on actually picking up unless you've got the perk points to spare. We're going to start off with the major perks, which are Science, Armourer, Rifleman, and Lone Wanderer. Armourer and Science are the crafting perks of a build. As you can no doubt tell from watching the video, this is a power armor character who uses energy weapons. For both these types of items, the only crafting perks we really need are Science and Armourer. The more ranks you get, the better upgrades you can unlock. I decided to go with Rifleman for this build, as I appreciate the solid accuracy and damage output of semi-auto rifles. As the weapons we wield are customizable, you could easily switch this character to automatics or pistols, but for my money, Rifleman is the way to go. Lone Wanderer is an insanely powerful perk, which makes you deal more damage, take less in return, and even grants additional carry weight. The one downside is that it only applies when you don't have a follower with you, but that's something we'll talk about in the followers section later on. For our minor perks, we have Demolition Expert, Scrapper, Scrounger, Nuclear Physicist, and Bloody Mess. Demolition Expert makes it so grenades become absolute room clearers. While I do love rifles, they aren't always the best at clearing mass hordes, so grabbing this perk ensures that our grenades can deal with groups for us instead. This character requires a hell of a lot of junk. They use a lot of high-tech equipment, so the easier it is to find junk, the better. As such, the Scrapper perk is a real handy one to get, meaning you can scrap down excess equipment in order to get some uncommon and rare components you'll need later on. The Scrounger perk helps ensure we stay stocked up on ammo. It also helps with the flow of caps, as you can sell the extra ammunition of types you aren't using in order to buy whatever you happen to need. Nuclear Physicist will make your fusion cores more efficient to use. As a power armor character, the last thing you want is to be left stranded with a spent fusion core and nothing to replace it. A bonus effect at the final rank is that you can also eject fusion cores and make them explode. Honestly, this isn't a particularly practical thing to do, but it can be real fun at times. Final minor perk is Bloody Mess, which increases your damage output. That's basically it, just more damage. Who doesn't like that? As for the role-playing perks, I went with Hacker, Awareness, and Toughness. You're a high-tech kind of character, so Hacker felt like a solid inclusion choice. Being able to hack into various terminals in the game will no doubt come in handy at some point while playing. The Awareness perk lets you see details about your targets in VATS, while also making VATS itself a little bit more effective. This isn't really going to change things with the character all that much, but as such a tech-heavy kind of guy, I did like the idea of his Pip-Boy granting more information than your standard Vault Dweller would get. And finally we have Toughness, arguably the most helpful of all the role-playing perks, but not by that much. While it does increase your damage resistance, you're in power armor. An extra 50 points isn't that much when you already have hundreds of points from the metal suit you're encased within. This is a tank build though, so a little extra tankiness is far from the worst thing to spend excess points on. Onto equipment, where I'll start with the weapons. The main weapon I used for this build was Old Faithful, the instigating laser rifle you can buy from Arturo in Diamond City. Laser rifles are pretty versatile, and in terms of modding it out, I just went with getting a solid amount of damage without sacrificing anything important. As my secondary weapon, I went for a plasma rifle. There are a couple of guaranteed legendary plasma rifles out there, but both require going deep into the factions that this character just wouldn't join, so instead you'll just have to keep your fingers crossed for a random legendary drop. This weapon is intended as the hard-hitting alternative to Old Faithful. The ammo is a bit rarer, and the slower projectile speed means it won't be sensible to use in every situation, but when you need an extra punch of damage, this is the weapon to turn to. Now for the centerpiece of the entire video, the XO2 Power Armor. This is one of the new bits of gear that was added in the free update, and there's a few different ways to obtain it, but the way I'd recommend is by completing the Speak of the Devil quest. Not only will this mission get you the suit of armour, but if you complete the final request of the devil at the end of it and turn off a radio signal, then you'll also end up with the Devil's Inferno mod. That being said, this isn't essential, as you can just go with the standard Tesla coils mod and keep the Enclave radio instead if you prefer. In terms of mods for the armour, there's a few different things I would recommend. First is painting everything with Enclave paint. You are the Enclave soldier after all. After that, you want to get all the pieces up to Mark 6 in order to get the maximum resistance as possible. I'd also recommend using the medic pump on the torso slot in order to ensure you stay healed up, even in the toughest of fights. And finally, I went with the targeting HUD on the helmet, in order to highlight my enemies in red, making target acquisition much quicker and easier. This is a power armor build, so what you wear underneath isn't all that important, but I went with the military cap and the Colonel's outfit. The Colonel's outfit is pretty cool, but you'll need to finish the Echoes of the Past mission to get your hands on it, and it's a real tough one to get through, so don't worry too much about prioritising this. Feel free instead to just wear something light, so that you're not wasting carry capacity, but don't have to be naked inside the suit. In terms of factions this character will want to join, obviously the Enclave is who he wants to side with. Problem is, all the Enclave people added in with this update will be hostile to you, and you can't do anything about that. As such, we're looking at the 4 main game factions, and the only one I could really make work are the Minutemen. Now this isn't because the Minutemen themselves are the most Enclave-like, but instead because you can just mould them to your purpose. As far as this soldier is concerned, he's just enlisting American citizens for his own cause. Pristine gravy and his ideals aren't something to focus on. You're just using him in order to help restore the United States to its pre-war strength. While the Brotherhood and the Institute are the more technology-focused factions, each would be seen as more of a threat to the Enclave than an ally in my opinion, so they're adversaries instead. If you're not with the Enclave, you're against them. In terms of followers for this build, you have 2 options. None, or Dogmeat. This is because you have the Lone Wanderer perk. If you have any follower except for Dogmeat, you will lose the amazing effects that this perk grants you. And let's be honest, none of the followers in Fallout 4 would be a good fit for the Enclave. Either they're already dedicated to another faction, or they're some kind of impure creature, like a mutant or a reporter, that wouldn't be welcome within the ranks of the Enclave. When it comes to playstyle, this character is a tank build through and through. You have absolutely ludicrous levels of energy and damage resistance, meaning you can take a mini nuke to the face. Literally. For full clarity, I am only playing this on hard difficulty, rather than very hard or survival, but it's still pretty impressive how little damage that attack dealt to me. It's only the very strongest enemies in the game that you'll need to be at all concerned about, as most regular foes will deal pitifully little damage to you. And with the medic pump equipped, even if you do get your health chipped away at, you automatically bounce back without needing to worry about keeping too close an eye on your health meter. Because you're so tough, in combat you can take your time, picking off enemies with precision shots, thinning out the herd one by one. Your damage output isn't anything crazy, but it really doesn't need to be. You don't need to worry about killing things fast when you'll outlast any attack that comes your way. In terms of roleplaying for this character, there's 2 different things you want to focus on. Killing anything that isn't a non-irradiated US citizen, and building up Enclave settlements for the good citizens to reside within. While the 2 options of kill or build may seem leagues apart, it's worth keeping in mind that this is a bad guy who thinks he's the good guy. To us it may be clear that he's an evil person fighting on behalf of an incredibly xenophobic faction, but in his mind he's helping restore the glory of his country, a mentality which has led to plenty of bloodshed throughout history. We can get more into his motives in the backstory section. The Enclave soldier grew up in your typical nuclear American family. Every morning he would repeat the Pledge of Allegiance and salute the flag. Raised as a patriot through and through, he believed it was his duty to join up with the military one day, and often looked down on those who didn't serve the country well enough. To him, anyone not willing to lay down their life without a second thought was a commie, and he only knew one way to deal with those people: This mentality meant that throughout his school years, he spent just as much time fighting with others as he did studying. He was an incredibly smart child, but this always came second to him in his own view of the world. Rather than put his mind to work for the betterment of mankind in a field such as medicine, or finding a way to avert disaster, he only really cared about the military. His grades were stellar, but rather than go to university, he immediately enlisted. He wanted to be on the front lines, taking the battle to China and never giving in. While he tried to join up just as a standard rifleman, eager to get into the thick of things, his CO saw the potential of the young man's mind, and instead pushed him towards the power armor unit. Here he was taught all about the intricacies of this lethal exosuit. In return for the promise of getting to wear a suit into battle, he agreed to help with the maintenance and research of these new inventions for a time. He clearly was a gifted engineer, but his relentlessness prevented him from pursuing this path for too long. Each day there was news of fighting against the Red Menace, and each day he asked his superiors to put him on the front lines. They held out as long as they could, but the young man's fiery patriotism was infectious, and they eventually relented, putting him on the next bird over. Clad in a shining suit of power armor, the soldier felt better than ever before. All he wanted was to blast away at the enemy, and end as many lives as possible. And his wish was granted. The battle was bloody and horrifying for nearly all involved, but for the Enclave soldier, it was heaven. He loved every moment, as something dark within him was fed in the depths of combat. While returning to camp, the rest of the company was solemn and silent, but he was giddy beyond measure, excitedly recounting his own exploits to those around him. In his excitement, he failed to pay attention to his surroundings, hearing too late the click of a mine under his heavy metal boot. The explosion was a deadly one, just not for him. The high-tech power armor was tough enough to save his life, the shrapnel reaching no further than his knee. The same could not be said for the standard troopers who had been standing next to him. 2 of his squad died a preventable death, and in turn he severely damaged his leg, meaning he could no longer walk, let alone fight. The medics let him know he was lucky to be alive, but there would be a long road to recovery before he was mobile again. To him, the news was entirely awful. He wasn't able to do the one thing he wanted, and was instead bedridden. He complained constantly about how unfair it was that he couldn't be on the front lines anymore, and it was this attitude which sealed his fate. His commanding officers saw his complete lack of empathy towards his fellow countrymen who had died as a result of his foolhardy actions, and felt they had to do the right thing. While still in the hospital beds, he received his discharge papers. He was no longer a part of the military, and his dream had been crushed. He returned to his home a bitter and jaded man, but rather than changing his views of the world, he doubled down on them, calling out his fellow soldiers as communists who were undermining things and working from the inside to destroy the country he loved so much. His community became more and more insular as he found reasons to believe others unworthy, but despite all this, he still ended up leading a relatively normal life. He found a wife with similar views to his own, and they settled down to live the kind of American life they believed to be right. And this was how they lived until the day the bombs fell. Once he wakes up in post-war America, he refuses to accept the reality of the situation. Folding over within his own mind, he decides to seek out the leaders of the government and help them, whether they want him to or not. And that there was my return to character builds. I hope you all enjoyed this one. I am planning on covering the Fallout 4 update a little bit more, and then returning to more varied RPG content. One thing that's going to stay though are the builds. I'm hoping I can release a new build every month, so make sure you're subscribed in order to see if I can make that come true. As always, thanks for watching. Sarge out.